Hey there, I'm Maggie, a certified career advisor and strengths coach.
And I'm Brandy. I help Fortune 100 companies hire smarter and faster than ever before. And this is Career Unmapped, where we help you navigate the modern job market because, let's be honest, careers don't come with GPS.
And in this episode, we are excited to introduce our first guest.
Yes, I'm very excited. This individual has been gracious enough to lift the curtain, so to speak, and help our listeners better understand the process from the recruiter's perspective in order to be more successful in the hiring process.
With over a decade of experience scaling teams for high growth technology companies from startups to global enterprises, this senior talent partners background spans full cycle technical recruiting, HR operations, and organizational design. He has a track record of building hiring strategies that enable engineering, product, and AI organizations to scale efficiently and sustainably. Here today to share his insights, introducing Jonathan Delory. Thanks for joining us, Jonathan.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Excited to be here.
We are very excited to have you, especially because we know recruiters. You're often misunderstood. So let's start there. Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into recruiting. What is it that you do?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you for the great intro. How did I get here? Well, I think like most folks that are recruiters kind of fell backwards into it. I think not too many people go to school for recruiting. You kind of just, like I said, fall into it. I am very similar case. I went to law school to realize I did not want to be a lawyer. And
Who
after
does?
graduating, yeah, right. After graduating, my older brother was in recruiting and he kind of introduced me to a few folks. And that's how I sort of started kicking the tires on the career. Ended up starting recruiting just like most folks do on the agency side of things. So working with a lot of small, mid-sized companies trying to fill their openings. Started on the IT side. So that's how I sort of kind of organically, started my career into tech recruiting. After doing that for 3 to 4 years, went over to the dark side, as most recruiters call it. Went to the corporate world, joined Salesforce. So a big enterprise company to help on the engineering side. Was there for almost 4 years and then started my startup journey. So left there for my first startup at Eightfold and pretty much been at startups ever since, as late as C stage and most recently up to seed stage. So my last company was Series A. So I got to see a lot of different stages at companies. And currently I'm part of Vivin AI, which is a enterprise applied AI company that has built digital twins for enterprises. And I've been working here for the last almost 6 months now.
Oh, that's amazing. With such a long tenure as a recruiter and obviously hitting a lot of different stages of organizations, like different sizes as well, it sounds like you've seen a lot. And you could probably agree. In your opinion, what do you think people get wrong about recruiters and the recruiting process?
Oh, it's a great question. Kind of a loaded question, if I'm being honest. But I think the biggest thing to take away from this is we're not the gatekeepers, right? I think we're more the translators, right? I think recruiters are measured on kind of filling positions, and we're often constrained by headcount or leveling decisions, timing, internal alignment, things like that. I think a lot of folks may think that we are the gatekeeper and we make the decisions, really we're here to partner with our hiring teams and sort of, help with those decisions and push and be there when they need it. But at the end of the day, we're not the gatekeepers, right? And I think that's a big takeaway that folks need to understand. I also think there's a lot of chaos in our world, and I think the more proactive candidates are, and is beneficial to us. I think a lot of that stuff can kind of fall through the cracks throughout the day and things like that. So I always appreciate candidates that are a little bit more proactive on that side. But yeah, to kind of circle back, I think the biggest takeaway is, we're not the decision makers, kind of that middle person and sort of furthering the ideas and the decisions themselves.
I really love that perspective. And, building on that, I think it is helpful to remind people the recruiters aren't the enemy. They're not looking to spend their day rejecting people, right? And I think as our, audience better understands who recruiters are, I do think it would be really helpful just to shed light on like, what is it that you do every day? What is it important to you? How are you spending your time? Just to, again, kind of humanize the role a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, to try and break it down, maybe I would say like, 30, 40% of my day is spent, or my week, I guess, is spent, candidate facing, screening, outreach, sourcing, prep calls, things like that. I'd say another 40% are doing similar things, but internally, right? Debriefing with teams, hiring intake calls, collaboration, that type of stuff. And I would say the other 30% or so is just straight chaos. It really is. It's, no day is ever the same, right? I think, even if you have your set schedule, things like that, things go awry, right? Whether you got to put out a fire, there's a certain candidate call you need because, it's closer to an offer and things like that. So I think, while I'd say about 70, 80% of my week maybe is sort of kind of scheduled and kind of, expect what is coming. But I would say the other, 30% or so, like I said, is ever changing and pivoting and things like that. And I really related a lot to like an account executive role, right? You're there's similar sort of intricacies in those two sort of roles. You have an ICP, right, as a salesperson, which is an ideal customer profile. That's my candidate profile, right? And to me the product is an open rec, right? Is an opening or a headcount that I'm trying to fill. My customer is the hiring team, and I'm working with them to figure out exactly what they need and do it the right way. And a lot of, to me, especially at a small company, it is a lot of headhunting, right? So the sourcing side to me is how, enterprise execs or account execs find customers, right? A lot of outreach and and grind. So I do compare it a lot to that. And like a salesperson's job, it's chaotic, right? And you have to kind of, you may have to make a pivot or change a schedule because you have a customer call that's, closer to the dollar and things like that. Or, for me, it'd be closer to an offer. So you got to kind of prioritize your day. You may have it all set up nice and neat at the beginning of the day. But typically things change pretty rapidly, and it's more about prioritization.
Yeah, I think chaos is, really understandable. Things change, especially to kind of comparing it to the sales role. There's so much out of your control, right? And I think a salesperson would maybe define like a successful day or a successful week as they've closed that big deal. So, as a technical recruiter for you, what would you define as like a successful day or a successful week?
Yeah, I mean, it's filling roles. I mean, it's that simple. I mean, that simple in terms of how to, the metrics behind it. Obviously, getting there isn't simple, but I mean, that's how we're all measured. We're measured by filling openings, filling recs. At the end of the day, even at big companies, where they're a little more metrics driven, it's more about, hey, how many candidates you have in the pipeline, the funnel, and things like that. At the end of the day, if you're filling roles and you're meeting your sort of your quota or whatever it is, you're going to be successful and you're going to continue to have the job. So to me, I think no matter small company, big company, it's about filling the roles. It just looks a little bit differently depending on the environment. Where when I was at Salesforce, it was about filling headcount. In these smaller environments, we're building a company, and it's really that straightforward. And so I think it may look a little bit differently, but at the end of the day, it's about filling the headcount.
You mean your job is not about just rejecting people and
It
like
is
telling
not.
people, "Oh, I
I don't
hate
like
you.
rejecting
I won't
people.
talk to you." Yeah.
That's a tough one. That's definitely the worst part of the job, but it is part of the job. So, and I think
Yeah,
if
for
you do it
sure.
the right way, though, it's not as bad as it sounds. I think if you do it the right way.
Yeah, but I mean, based on what you said, like your goal is to find the right person and get them into the company as soon as possible. And in order to do that, it's actually a lot of work to find those folks. So, I mean, we've talked a lot about kind of your perspective, like kind of sitting in the role today. If I look at this from the candidate's perspective, though, they're also doing just a lot of work to try and find the right job and trying to
It's a
marry
full time job
themselves.
looking for a
It's
job. That's what I say.
it's a full-time job looking for a job. When you think
100%.
about candidates who consistently move forward, who are consistently successful, I say, what are they doing right? One of the things you mentioned was, hey, they're actually reaching out to recruiters because your days are sometimes kind of crazy. Is that part of that? Is there other things that kind of go into making someone a little bit more successful?
Yeah, so probably there are definitely, a few factors. I do think it's a case by case basis in terms of the role, right? I think on the end, as a tech recruiter, I think, it's a little bit more black and white, right? A lot of my candidates may not move forward because they're not meeting that technical bar, so they're not quite at that bar in terms of whatever tech screen we're doing. So they usually fall off somewhere in that process. So a little more black and white than that. But as a whole, I think, what I appreciate about candidates, I think what consistently kind of moves them forward, it's the best candidates are the ones that connect the dots for you, right? In terms of a few different things, right? They're clear on why they're fit for this role or this company. It's not just like they're interviewing to interview and things like that. They show pattern recognition, right? And what I mean by that is they're providing examples of how they've done this before in the role that they're interviewing for, right? And they're talking in examples, not adjectives and things like that. So it makes it a lot easier to evaluate them and to connect those dots. So when you're assessing them in an interview or a debrief, things like that. So to me, I think the best candidates are really showing not only their excitement and motivations for the specific role and company and kind of showing that, it sets us apart. And don't get me wrong, you could have a few companies in the mix that you're interviewing for, right, that are similar in that sense. So it's not like you're fluffing or anything like that, but really showing that excitement and energy for the company and the role itself. But then actually helping connect the dots by answering interview questions and behavioral questions with live examples, right, and scenarios and things like that. And so really making it easier or more seamless to evaluate them for the role. Some of the best debriefs I'm on, and what I mean by a debrief is all the interviews are over. I'm getting on a meeting with the entire interview team, and we're sort of going through everyone's thoughts on their interview with the individual, and then kind of making a collective decision. The best debriefs are the ones where their interviewers are asking questions and they're able to relate and talk very easily about sort of the response and why they think it was the right response and how they would fit in, and showing signals that the ramp up, no matter what the job is, but the ramp up into our environment would be fairly quick and seamless, and they have a lot to offer in a short period of time. And then the other stuff that maybe they need to be trained on or ramp up on, we're willing to surround ourselves with with the right people to bring that person up to speed because they have a lot to offer.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great
I
answer.
love that
I
clear
do that.
pattern recognition. I'm gonna steal that for
I wrote it down. I'm like, ooh, connect the dots, pattern
Mhm.
recognition. Yes,
Mhm. I
yes.
love that.
I'm going to agree with this wholeheartedly. Every interview that I've ever done, and I think of myself as a pretty good interviewer, it's because of that. And this is something my mother actually taught me. It's like, hey, if you got to connect with people. And then to your point, you got to connect the dots for them. They don't know you. All right. And they don't know your past. So you've got to make sure that you're telling stories that relate to the things the organization is really needing. Right. So such great advice.
No, it's it.
Okay.
Just
Okay.
to
Go
go
ahead.
continue off that point too, where there's only so much you can get off a piece of paper, right, off a
Hmm.
resume and things like that. And it's your interviews are an opportunity to sell yourself, right, and to also talk about things that aren't clear on that piece of paper, right. So I think that's huge, and you want to take advantage of that. And at the same time, the best interviews are you're interviewing us just like we're interviewing you. So there's that kind of that good, healthy back and forth. And usually from those sort of, you may have some set questions as an interviewer, but the best interviews are the ones that, you're coming up with questions, through those answers, right? So if someone's, an interviewee is answering a question, and then, might bring up another point and kind of get questions off of that. That's the best kind of back and forth. The ones that answers and responses are sort of organically coming up with additional questions, and you're diving even deeper. That's usually a strong interview.
Great. We could talk so much, I think, about interviewing. We might have you back just for an interview
Works.
episode because there's a lot to
Yeah.
say about that.
Yeah.
If I pull back a little bit and just ask, okay, we know what to do right, what makes people more successful, connect the dots, right? And I think we could do that in a number of places on your resume, in the interviews, in every interaction that you have with folks. What are the fastest ways candidates knock themselves out of the process? You mentioned one, which is like, hey, you
Yeah.
literally just don't have the technical chops to do this when we're doing in technical evaluations. But what else?
Yeah, it's almost the reverse of what they do well, right? It's talking, very vaguely, right? And then, not really answering questions, kind of staying in generalities instead of specifics. I think that's huge, right? And I think, whether it's nerves, whether, not interviewing, just not understanding how to interview and things like that, you get a lot of people kind of talking in circles a little bit and a little bit vague. And sometimes you kind of just wish like, hey, great question. I unfortunately don't have experience with that, and kind of maybe relate it to something you do, or just be straightforward. That's all, just because you don't, aren't able to answer a question, directly or have the experience, like that's okay, right? You can still get the job, right? There's still
Hmm.
a lot of other things happening, a lot of the questions. And at the end of the day, we don't hire people because they hit every single bullet point on a job description or things like that. It's so much more than that. And, at the end of the day, interviewing is subjective too, right? So, I think being direct, the people who are super vague or trying to talk in circles or fluff, also often goes sideways. So I think that's a big one. Sort of over indexing a little bit on like, I guess maybe prestige. I don't know if prestige is the right word, but over indexing on like prestige instead of like actual fit for the role, right? Like, oh, like, thinking like, oh, because I'm really interested in your product or your company, or, I did research on this, like that definitely you need to do your homework and that needs to be part of it. But, I want people that be excited about the environment and the company, but I want to also understand why you're a fit for that environment in that company. So really, I would, hone in on that stuff. That's another big piece. I mean, this seems pretty obvious, but do your homework. If I get on a call and someone knows really nothing about us, I mean, anybody can go on the website and do a quick kind of research. So I mean, that's almost an immediate just down.
Yeah.
You don't know anything about us, that kind of stuff. You're getting on a call with somebody, whether it's a recruiter or anybody else, know why you're here, know a basic understanding of what the company does. So I know every recruiter does their screen a little bit differently, but that's the first question I ask people, something along the lines of, hey, tell me what you know about us, just so I know how much information to provide you with. I also don't want to be redundant, right? So that's the first thing I ask people. So do your homework. I'd say that's a big one as well. And then, we do get people talking bad about your past companies and why you left things. We're going to ask you about your history and things like that. I think you got to do it in the right way. I think, believe it or not, people have a tendency to talk poorly about past managers and companies and things like that. And that's, whether true or not, there's about a right way to kind of go about it. So that's usually a negative as well.
A theme that I'm picking up on here is the saying, like, fake it till you make it. That's probably not good advice to follow when it comes to interviews. Do your research about the company, do your research about the role, make sure that you actually have the experience needed, and have some real stories or examples prepared and in mind to help really demonstrate and connect those dots for the recruiters and for the interviewers so that they really feel confident that you are able to step in and fit into the environment, but also start making an impact in the role. And in those instances where you don't have that experience, just own it and be really, eager to express your willingness to learn. I think that's actually a great segue into a kind of a hot topic right now around using AI to help generate resumes. In our work that we do with recruiters, uh, we do hear a lot of, hey, this resume, it's just based off the job description. It's not really based off of this person's experience. We've done a whole episode on how to use those tools, but incorporate your experience, right? I would love to hear from your perspective and in your experience. Can you really tell when a resume or even a message is AI generated?
Messaging, yes. Resumes, probably not. I don't think so. I think, at the end of the day, just like all AI, right? AI should be a partner or a drafting partner, however you want to explain it. It shouldn't remove your voice, right? And I think it's a lot more obvious when it does that on outreach and messaging. End of the day, your resume, I'm not someone who believes in, kind of the objective at the top of the resume and all that stuff. I just want your job and then bullets of showing, your responsibilities at that job. So at the end of the day, your voice really isn't in there, right? You're using sort of action verbs and things like that. So I don't think I can really tell when it's, part of a resume. And honestly, it'd probably be a good tool to use to align that a little bit. I think the biggest advice I can give on a resume, again, I'm an engineering recruiter by trade. Obviously, I do everything now. So I see all different kinds of resumes, but what I've seen the most of is technical resumes. And for me, for the skill section at the top or whatever, you should be applying any skills you have listed on the top should be applied somewhere in the bullets of your role, right? So if you have all these skills listed on the top of your resume and I'm going through all these different past experiences and your bullets and what you were doing and your responsibilities at those jobs, and I'm not seeing any of those skills, that to me is a no-no, right? So any skills you're listing on that resume, you should ideally have them applied somewhere in your resume, whether it's internships, projects, work experience. So that to me is the biggest takeaway on that. On the outreach, it's super obvious when people are using AI. There's no personality to it. They're long, they're verbose, and they're just so generic. So to me, I definitely can tell that. Not necessarily a put off at the end of the day. I like the profile. I'm going to talk to that person because my job is to fit the right profile in the role. So it's not a reason for me to reject people necessarily. If I'm on the fence or something, maybe, but no, it's really obvious. You can tell it removes your voice a little bit. I think it's less obvious in resumes just because for me, a resume really shouldn't, it's not a cover letter, right? So it shouldn't have too much of your voice in it anyway. It's all about action, right? And skills and work experience. And I think all the old rules apply, right? In terms of, using action words and that kind of stuff. So I don't think I can really probably tell on a resume.
Well, and I think, how much do you care? It sounds like for you, it doesn't bother you that much. Sometimes it might be a little obvious, but
Yeah. I will tell
Yep.
you what bothers me. I do have one thing that bothers me. So the one thing that is a huge pet, well, actually I have two little, actually I have a little pet peeve too, but my big pet peeve is someone applying to a job and then instantly messaging me on LinkedIn. So my LinkedIn jobs that I have posted, my name's on there. It just gets sent directly to me. Someone who applies to a job and then like literally 2 seconds later is pinging me on LinkedIn. Like I appreciate the proactiveness, you reaching out, all that kind of stuff. Wait a couple of days because that means I haven't seen it yet or slipped through like then do that. That's fine. But the ones it's like, oh, I just applied. It's just like, I'm not going to get to your resume today. You got to realize I'm getting hundreds of applicants, a day, a week. So that's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine. And then I have a really stupid one. When people send me their number and they don't do like the hyphens or the periods, like that drives me nuts when it's just a line of numbers. I know that's such a like weird pet peeve, but it's like, it's so annoying because it's so hard to like, read the number, but that's a big one for me too. Not reasons I'm not going to talk to you, but just some pet peeves of mine.
Oh my gosh. So we've talked, I think, about the whole gamut of things, right? Like, we talked a little bit about like interviewing and showing up like you're real and being able to translate and connect those dots between what you've done and what the company needs. We've talked a little bit about the resume, even there, and how to use AI to kind of push yourself forward. I got two questions for you. Uh, Cover letters. Do we still use those? Is that still a thing?
It's definitely still a thing. I see them here and there. I
Mhm.
hiring managers are reading cover letters. I have read a couple that are very tailored to the company and the role, and I can appreciate that stuff. But really, your resume should be obvious enough. So if you're telling me a cover letter is going to be the reason I'm going to talk to you because it's that obvious you're a fit for the job, that means your resume is trash.
Mm,
And it's not showing what it's supposed to show. And if you're going to spend that kind of time and effort on a cover letter, put it into the resume. I would rather have somebody have multiple resumes and tailoring them to the job that they're applying to. Uh, and that's not, so for instance, there's certain engineers out there, product managers, they have a sort of they've worked at startups and things like that. So they have a lot to offer. And they could probably apply to a few different roles, right? I would rather you should have multiple resumes and depending on the role that you're applying to, assuming that's your background and you're capable of doing that because of your skill set. I think that is more wise and better energy and time spent than doing a cover letter.
yeah. That's good to hear because that's exactly what we advise people to do.
Yes.
And I have several resumes myself specifically. To your point, I've worked at a lot of startups. I do a lot of things, and so I fit into a lot of different places. So I want to make sure that I have those opportunities. My resume sort of reflects what the company needs.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'm example, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm an example of that, right? Because of the last, several years, right? I have an HR background now in operations and things like that. If I were to go to apply tomorrow at a startup, my resume is going to look a lot different than if I were to go to
Mhm.
apply back at Salesforce, right? For an
yeah,
engineering recruiting role, right? They're going to look completely different. So someone like myself, if I'm back on the market and applying and I'm open to large environments, small environments, I'm someone that would need two or three different resumes.
yeah, good call.
Quick plug for episode 3 of
Yeah.
how to tailor your resume.
We go over all of that in
Lots of
episode 3.
advice
There you go. Look at that.
on.
Good. You guys know what you're
When
doing. That's why I'm here.
That's why we're here. When we're in this process of sort of interviewing and talking to recruiters, I know, at least for me, that this question always comes up is like, when's the not awkward time to bring up compensation? And when is the best time? When is the worst time to bring up compensation?
Yeah, probably an answer that's going to be a little bit subjective, right? I know a lot of recruiters, obviously everybody operates a little bit differently. My style, the sooner the better. And if you don't bring it up on the first screen, I'm going to bring it up. So I bring it up towards the end. Again, that's a high level discussion. It's not a number I'm going to hold you to or anything like that. But I like to get it out as soon as possible for a few reasons. Number one, the more we talk about it, the more I can nail it down at the end when the time comes. Number two, I don't want to waste people's time, right? The worst possible thing to happen is we get all the way to the end of the process. I love you, or we love you, you love us. And then we realized we're tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars off on compensation. We just wasted everybody's time. So I am someone that will bring it up at the end of the recruiter screen, get a general idea, explain why I'm asking it this way, things like that. Some of it's self-serving a little bit. I want to try and get a number out and kind of, make sure we're aligned. But if they won't give me a number, I'll give kind of the range and make sure we're not, again, ways off. But to me, the sooner the better for a bunch of reasons. But I'll get it out on the first screen.
Good. The earlier the better is what I hear, and usually the way that I go. But you said some folks won't give you it. When we hear the question, what are your salary expectations? It is nerve wracking. I'm just going to say
Yeah.
that because you do
Yeah.
feel like you're like, oh, if I give you a number, I'm going to get
Yeah.
gypped. So, like, what's your advice there? Having
Yeah.
probably been in both seats, right?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's my advice there is do your research, right? So, have an answer and have a range and explain why, right? And, that way you have, you can kind of, back it up if you need to. I think, it's good to give a range as opposed to like a set number, something along, based on sort of market data, my experience, I'm targeting something in this range. The benefits for the candidate side is, if you see a job posting, I think it's in most states now, it should have some type of range on there. So if you don't have a number, you don't have market research, throw that range out there at the recruiter and kind of see what they say, right? So I think that would be how I would do it is, provide a range, be prepared to kind of back it up if you need to, whether that's market intel, current compensation, that kind of stuff, but that's how I would say. And, it depends on the scope of the role too. I think one thing that people don't realize is, at least from my side on the recruiting side, it's not necessarily about, your background and your salary history and things like that. It's about the role itself. It's about the scope and things like that too. So, you crush an interview process and things like that. And, we're going to pay you for what the role entails, not necessarily because your package is, your current role is this and I can have you lower and that kind of stuff. It's about the role itself, the scope. Internal equity is a huge factor. People need to realize that, especially a larger company, like we live within comp bands, right? Internal equity matters. Offers require approvals. Smaller environments are going to trade equity for cash. I'm sorry, cash for equity. Timing means everything. So there's so many factors that factor into compensation that the earlier you talk about it, the more information you have, the better. I will tell you, at least the way I operate, I'm your best friend when it comes to offer time, meaning the more information you provide me, the better. Because if we're outside the comp spans or outside of our budget at a smaller company, and I know I need to go above that, the more information I have from you, the better, because I will use that to leverage the package that you want. At the end of the day, I want to come back with a compensation package that makes this decision easy for you, not harder. And sometimes I need more information to do that. And so I know, and I don't blame candidates for this, but, I can't ask certain things, right? I can't ask what you're making. I can't, like that. But if I have that information, if I have, competing offers, if I have, all that, any information I can use to leverage it into the package that you want, I'm going to use that. And it's not, people may be a little hesitant to give them information to think they're going to lowball you. You're just going to get kind of the lowest possible offer. Oftentimes I'm using that information to get you the best possible offer. So, and again, that's just how I operate. I know obviously everyone's a little bit differently. But come offer time, I will leverage whatever information I possibly can to get you an offer that makes this an easy decision, especially, if we're your top choice and you're really excited about the role.
I love that. I love that. Uh, you already, I think, answered my next question. It's like what's happening behind the scenes around candidates don't see a lot. It sounds like
It's a lot. It's a lot. Especially at a larger company, we do, it's a larger company. I think it's almost a little bit more straightforward because, you have set comp bands, you have internal equity that you're playing off because there's a lot more people on the team. I deal with roles now that they're the first time we're filling the role, right? So there's no internal, equity to kind of go off of and things like that. It helps having that stuff. So I think at a larger company is a little bit more straightforward, but it's also more rigid, right? You can only operate in certain guidelines, and things like that. So at a smaller company, I think there's more flexibility, but it also requires me to kind of get more information, right? And I use I use my candidate screens and intel to kind of help set those processes. Obviously, I have tools that I can use that I can get market data from. But I think at a smaller environment like this, where there's maybe not set comp bands or enough internal equity to kind of have those set things, you're growing and you're building those over time. I think there's a lot more flexibility, but it also makes it a little harder in the long term, right? You want to make sure you're setting these kind of precedents the right way. But I use the market to help me with that. I use candidates to help me with that, and then market research.
I think that's so helpful of even just understanding, hey, this could be different based off of the different companies that you're interested in and that you're interviewing for. And that again, this isn't necessarily up to the recruiter they're not the enemy, they're not the gatekeeper. They have a job to do and they have confines within their own job. But I love, your attitude that like you really want to at that stage that you want to be that person's champion. I'm curious if you have, a story in mind that you could share about when you really went to bat for somebody and the reasons why you really wanted to be that champion for that candidate.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I have a few of those over the years. I think I will say one thing I do like, as I mentioned earlier, right? We're sort of the translators or the middle person, right? And at the end of the day, we don't get to make the decision, but we can influence it, right? And but I pick my spots, right? I think as a partner, as a recruiter, especially a corporate recruiter, right? We're internal recruiter for one company. At the end of the day, every decision I make needs to be for the business, right? It needs to be the right decision for the business. That's why I'm very transparent with my hiring teams. I'm not just telling them what I like about a candidate. I'm also telling them potential flags and things we need to, kind of look for. Because at the end of the day, if I push a hire that I don't think is the right hire, it does nothing for anybody because in 3 months, 6 months, 10 months, we're just going to be backfilling the role anyway. My goal is to make long-term hires, right? And people that are a fit for the company are there long-term. And so I pick my spots, right? And I want them to know that if I'm pushing for somebody, it's not, I don't do this every week, right? It's because I really believe in that individual. I think one story that comes to mind is one of my earlier startup roles. We're about several hundred employees, but we had a position that it was the first hire for the org the first person coming into that role. Every hire had to go, any offer had to go through the CEO for approvals, no matter whether they interviewed with them or not. And I met with an individual who I just really liked on the screen. She wasn't coming out of our target companies, wasn't part of a high growth startup, which is what my target was. It was a no name company. Really liked her. And when I put her in front of my hiring manager, they pushed back a little bit. Same thing, this background doesn't kind of stick out. And I said, I understand, but I met with her. Here's the reasons A, B, and C. I really think you should talk to her. And I kind of went to bat, which as a recruiter is a little bit nerve wracking, right? Because, at the end of the day, interviewing is subjective, right? It's completely subjective. You could love somebody, the other person could hate them for all different reasons. So doing that, it does make you a little bit nervous because at the end of the day, you're putting your reputation on the line, right? And if you do that again, they're like, oh, well, last time you were wrong. So I did that. Hiring manager's like, all right, I'll do it. Met with her, loved her. And then we just kept going through that with every interview and got into the debrief. I mean, she was a home run. Everybody liked her. Clear cut, we want to go move forward. We had champions for her, everything. Put her in front of the CEO and he denied the offer. He goes, no, because, didn't like the company she was coming out of. We pushed. I finally told him, I was like, listen, you're going to want to hire this person. Promise you. She's going to do great. Ended up making the hire. He said, all right, that person 6 years later, still with the company. She hit a top performance award her first year. I mean, just like crushed it. So it's just those are the stories that make you feel really good. And like I said, you don't want to play that card every time, but because of meeting with her, having the team back her, it was pretty easy to kind of go to bat for.
What a good story. And I think, it's a great example of some of the things that you've been sharing throughout this conversation as well that, you saw her potential, but she crushed her interview with the hiring manager. She kept crushing her interviews and then most importantly crushed the job and was a top performer and a long-term retention employee. So a great example of that recruiter's intuition, but also how she made it easy for you to go to bat for her because she was doing all of the right things as a candidate through that interview process.
And I think, it is one of the hard parts I think about recruiting, right? Is the signals I'm looking for are, cultural fit, interest in the company, how they kind of communicate and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, I'm relying on my hiring team to understand, whether they fit into the, requisition, right? In terms of the requirements for the role. Some of my positions that I'm recruiting for are super technical. Other ones are in scopes that I don't know about, right? I haven't, I've never been a product marketer, or things like that. So you got to rely on your hiring team for that kind of stuff. So it's tough too, because, a lot of the times you kind of, fall in love with a candidate in the sense of like, pushing for them and wanting them to get the job and win the job. But, you have your hiring team telling you, that they're not the right fix. They're falling short on this. And that they would run through walls for the company and kind of ramp up quickly and things like that. But at the end of the day, there's certain requirements and expectations for a role. And in those instances, you got to say, you got to understand, and those people are hard to reject. But I think that's probably the worst part about the job is someone that would excel here, but it would maybe take a while or a ramp up and there's not enough bandwidth to offer them that. And you kind of got to move on. I think those are the hard ones to pass on. The ones that hit on that, and then you also have a hiring team saying, yeah, they're the right fit. I mean, those are easy to push for.
Mhm. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for some great storytelling. Not just that story, but like all the advice you've given and perspective you've given so far. It's been super, super helpful, at least for me. I've gotten a lot out of it. But before we let you go, okay, we want to do a quick lightning round. It's just short
Okay.
answers, gut reactions. Okay, just give me the first thing that comes to mind. No need to explain. Okay, we're just gonna leave it out there on the floor. All right, you ready?
All right. I'm pretty hungry. It might be all food related. No.
All right, resume. Can it be longer than a page? Yes or no?
Yes.
LinkedIn cold messages. Helpful, annoying.
Yes. Helpful. Sorry. So again, I may ignore them, but I've also hired people that have done cold reach out. So yeah, helpful.
Helpful. Referrals. Overrated or the best way / fastest way to get in?
Fastest way to get in, but also overrated.
Okay.
Like I get more bad referrals than good ones, but the good ones are always, some of the best hires. So yeah, you gotta keep track of referrals.
Okay. Job hopping every 2 years. This is the millennials. We do this. Deal breaker, just something to be expected.
Something to be expected, but it will be a deal breaker at certain companies, depending on who the leadership is, especially the smaller environments.
Reapplying to the same company. I mean, is that okay? Is it frowned upon? Expected?
It's fine. I think certain companies have certain rules where you can't re-engage and things like that. But yeah, I think the no-no is applying to 20 jobs at a company all at once. Recruiters see that. I know if you applied, what roles you applied to. If I'm a big company, I have an ATS, we know exactly how many roles you applied to at the time you applied to. That's a no-no.
Okay. And then negotiating that first offer. Always, sometimes, never, always. Yeah.
Love it.
I gotta negotiate, advocate for yourself. Yeah.
Advocate for yourself for sure. Yeah. Again, Jonathan, I just want to say thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me,
Being
guys.
so open. Like, this has been great. You were a little nervous, I know, coming in, but you were fine. You were great. This is awesome.
Brandon and I have both been taking notes this whole time.
Oh my
We
God, I'm just
both
writing
learned a lot.
furiously. I'm like, yes, I'm going to tell this to everyone.
Oh, this is fun. No, thanks for having me. This is great.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Any final thoughts you want to leave our job seekers
Yeah, no,
before
I
we
mean,
wrap up?
I think I alluded to this a few times, but it's such a subjective process, right? Applying to jobs and things like that. These are my own thoughts, my own opinions based off of my experience, right? I think different recruiters are gonna feel differently. We all operate differently, so kind of keep that in mind. But I think job hunting's tough. I think be smart about it, and really, I think once you get the applications, you get the interviews and things like that. Do your homework, ask the right questions. But yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
I want to give you a round of applause, but my microphone will pick it up. So we'll do a silent round of applause here. That's a hell of a place to end. So we're just gonna say we're gonna end there. I want to say to our audience, if you take nothing else from this episode, maybe take two things. One, recruiters are not the enemy, and then the thing that I wrote down: connect the dots / pattern recognition. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that's like super important to remember. Recruiters are people too. They're juggling a lot and they're trying to fill the job. You really are trying to get the job filled. So they're not dragging you around on purpose. So
Yes.
remember
Yeah,
that.
that is the biggest takeaway, right? We want to fill the job just as much as you want to fill the job.
Want
as
to
the
get the
candidate.
job. Yeah.
So if you're the right,
yeah.
if you're the right fit, we're gonna advocate for you. I think that's the sooner we fill the job, the better. Yeah,
That's one of those
that's
that
one thing
help
we all
me
have in common.
help me help you. Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. And, we hear a lot from the candidate side, how it can feel confusing and frustrating and honestly pretty personal sometimes. But I think you've just done such a wonderful job of really sharing how recruiters are thinking, what they're up against, the job they have to do, and what they really care about, which is filling the right person into the right role at the end of the day. So thank you for joining us. This is really why we started Career Unmapped, is to help candidates stop guessing and start navigating their career with clarity and confidence.
This is great. Thanks for having me. Hopefully, maybe I'll join again.
Yeah. Yeah. If you found this episode helpful, please follow the show, leave us a review, share it with your friends who are job searching right now or thinking about making a move.
And if there's a topic you want us to cover or another guest, Jonathan set the bar pretty high, but We'd love to hear from you. So drop us a message because we know careers don't come with GPS.
But you don't have to navigate them alone. We'll see you next time on Career Unmapped. Bye, folks.